It's classic book talk time. I'm afraid I must be going, Basil, he murmured. And before I go, I insist upon your answering a question I put to you some time ago. What is that? Said the painter, keeping his eyes fixed on the ground. You know quite well. I do not, Harry. Well, I will tell you what it is. I want you to explain to me why you won't exhibit Dorian Gray's picture. I want the real reason. I told you the real reason. No, you did not. You said it was because there was too much of yourself in it. Now that is childish. Harry, said Basil Howard, looking him straight in the face. Every portrait that is painted with feeling is a portrait of the artist, not of the sitter. The sitter is merely the accident, the occasion. It is not he who is revealed by the painter. It is rather the painter who, on the colored canvas, reveals himself. The reason I will not exhibit this picture is that I'm afraid that I have shown in it the secret of my own soul. Harry laughed. And what is that? He asked. I will tell you, said Howard, but an expression of perplexity came over his face. I'm all expectation, Basil, continued his companion, glancing at him. Oh, there is really very little to tell, Harry, answered the painter, and I'm afraid you will hardly understand it. Perhaps you will hardly believe it? Lord Henry smiled, and leaning down, plucked a pink-petaled daisy from the grass and examined it. I am quite sure I shall understand it, he replied, gazing intently at the little golden white feathered disc. And as for believing things, I can believe anything, provided it is quite incredible. The wind shook some blossoms from the trees, and the heavy lilac blooms with their clustering stars moved to and fro in the languid air. A grasshopper began to chirrup by the wall, and like a blue thread, a long, thin dragonfly floated past on its brown gauze wings. Lord Henry felt as though he could hear Basil Hallward's heart beating, and wondered what was coming. The story is simply this, said the painter after some time. 2 months ago, I went to a crush at Lady Brandon's. You know we poor artists have to show ourselves in society from time to time, just to remind the public that we are not savages. With an evening coat and a white tie, as you told me once, anybody, even a stockbroker, can gain a reputation for being civilized. Well, after I had been in the room about 10 minutes, talking to huge overdressed dowagers and tedious academicians, I suddenly became conscious that someone was looking at me. I turned halfway around and saw Dorian Gray for the first time. When our eyes met, I felt that I was growing pale. A curious sensation of terror came over me. I knew that I had come face to face with someone whose mere personality was so fascinating that if I allowed it to do so, it would absorb my whole nature, my whole soul, my very art itself. I did not want any external influence in my life. You know yourself, Harry, how independent I am by nature. I have always been my own master, had at least always been so, till I met Dorian Gray. Then, but I don't know how to explain it to you. Something seemed to tell me that I was on the verge of a terrible crisis in my life. I had a strange feeling that fate had in store for me exquisite joys and exquisite sorrows. I grew afraid and turned to quit the room. It was not conscience that made me do it. It was a sort of cowardice. I take no credit to myself for trying to escape. Conscience and cowardice are really the same things, Basil. Conscience is the trade name of the firm, that is all. I don't believe that, Harry, and I don't believe you do either. However, whatever was my motive, it may have been pride, for I used to be very proud. I certainly struggled to the door. There, of course, I stumbled against Lady Brandon. You're not going to run away so soon, Mr. Howard, she screamed out. You know her curiously shrill voice? Yes, she is a peacock in everything but beauty, said Lord Henry, pulling the daisy to bits with his long, nervous fingers. I could not get rid of her. She brought me up to royalties and people with stars and garters and elderly ladies with gigantic tiaras and parrot noses. She spoke of me as her dearest friend. I'd only met her once before, and she took it into her head to lionize me. I believe some picture of mine had made a great success at the time, at least had been chattered about in the penny newspapers, which is the 19th century standard of immortality. Suddenly, I found myself face to face with the young man whose personality had so strangely stirred me. We were quite close, almost touching. Our eyes met. It was reckless of me, but I asked Lady Brandon to introduce me to him. Perhaps it was not so reckless after all. It was simply inevitable. We would have spoken to each other without any introduction. I'm sure of that. Dorian told me so afterwards. He too felt that we were destined to know each other. And that is a selection from The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So basically, this book talks a little bit about immortality and can you achieve it. It's slightly foreshadowing. I don't want to give too much away. And there's also like a theme about the connection between the artist and their arts. And then there's also like a little bit of like, can you become too obsessed with someone, kind of, or too obsessed with yourself? Like the dangers of vanity and the dangers of hedonism. If you don't know what hedonism is, basically it's a fancy name for living for pleasure alone. It's kind of questions whether living a moral life is good, like whether innocence is good, things like that. It also talks about friendship and what does it mean to be a real friend, and influence, like how much influence does another person have on you. So in some ways, this is kind of, you could say it was kind of an experiment to kind of play with that idea and see where it leads the main character. It's some weighty things, and a lot of them are under the surface. So it may not seem like it's not a very gripping storyline, but again, it's kind of playing with themes. It's a thinker of a book again. We got another thinker of a book. Oh, it is a digital book club book. It is available for simultaneous use, so you can do a digital book club with it if you'd like. There'll be a guide inside shortly after this video. That guide will have the same thing that I've been putting in all of the guides. So discussion questions, themes, summary, lots of online resources to kind of give you an overview of the book. Anyway, that's kind of the book.